Troy Bryant was 42, quiet and forgettable at first glance. Most people at the Blackstone Hotel Gala thought his wife Vanessa had married beneath herself. He drove an old Toyota Avalon or a scratched Casio watch and stood silently near the back wall while Chicago's elite ignored him. What they didn't know was that Troy had secretly funded almost the entire scholarship gala. Vanessa smiled tightly, lifted her wine glass, and dumped Cabernet straight onto his white tuxedo shirt, just as Eleanor Whitmore turned around. Before we continue, comment your country and local time below. I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach. And if you like slow burn stories about betrayal, quiet power, and earned justice, subscribe now. Tomorrow's story gets even colder. 18 months earlier, the marriage had already started dying in small, quiet ways. Not through screaming, not through broken dishes or slammed doors. It died through pauses, long silences at dinner, empty looks across polished countertops, the sound of Vanessa Bryant typing on her phone, while Troy sat 3 feet away, reading shipping reports from Midwest rail terminals. Their house in Lincoln Park looked perfect from the outside. $6 million in renovated limestone and glass, heated floors, wine cellar, rooftop terrace facing the Chicago skyline. But the bedrooms felt colder every month. Vanessa had become obsessed with rooms full of important people, charity boards, startup mixers, political fundraisers, private dinners at Maple and Ash where nobody ate enough to justify the bill. Troy noticed it first in the way she introduced him. "This is my husband, Troy." Then quickly afterward, "He works in logistics." The sentence always landed like an apology. At one dinner in River North, a venture capitalist asked Troy what exactly he did. "Transportation infrastructure consulting," Troy answered calmly. The man nodded once and immediately turned back toward Vanessa and another founder, discussing artificial intelligence. Troy never interrupted, never competed for attention. He simply sat there folding his napkin carefully beside untouched steak, while Vanessa laughed louder than necessary at jokes that were not funny. A year earlier, she used to ask him about his day. Now she mostly asked questions like, "You're wearing that watch again," or "Do you realize everyone here drives something nicer than your Avalon?" The Avalon bothered her more than almost anything else. The silver Toyota sat in the driveway beside her black Range Rover autobiography, like a delivery car parked at the wrong address. Troy kept it because it worked. That answer irritated Vanessa every time. One snowy February morning, she stood near the kitchen island scrolling Instagram while Troy poured coffee into his dented thermos. "You know Eleanor Whitmore's husband drives an Aston Martin," she said casually. Troy sealed the thermos lid. "I'm happy for him." Vanessa looked up slowly. "That's your problem, Troy." "What is?" "You're comfortable being invisible." Troy studied her face for a moment. The expensive skincare, the careful makeup, the exhaustion underneath both. Then he picked up his keys. "There are worse things to be." He left before she answered. The truth was, Troy had spent most of his adult life learning the value of silence. Silence helped people underestimate him. Silence revealed things. And lately, Vanessa had been revealing more than she realized. 3 months later, Troy sat alone in his office near West Loop reviewing quarterly freight projections when his phone buzzed with a chase fraud alert. Large transfer detected. He opened the account activity. $42,000. Destination Bennett Student Financial Services. Claire Bennett, Vanessa's younger sister. Troy stared at the screen for several seconds before returning to work. That night, Claire called him crying. "You actually paid it off," she whispered. "All of it." Troy leaned against the balcony railing outside his office. The Chicago River below looked black under freezing rain. "You needed a clean start," he said. "I can pay you back." "No," Troy interrupted gently. "Just finish nursing school." Claire cried harder after that. Vanessa never knew where the money came from. She assumed Troy had arranged some kind of loan. That happened often. Vanessa saw outcomes. She rarely asked about mechanisms. The mortgage crisis had been similar. 8 months earlier, Vanessa secretly refinanced portions of the house to maintain her social spending after several investment accounts dipped during a market correction. Troy discovered it through mailed documents left unopened in the kitchen. He fixed the issue quietly within 48 hours, transferred money, closed the exposure, protected the house. Vanessa never asked how. The pattern repeated constantly. Problems vanished around Troy. Bills got handled. Accounts stabilized. People got helped. But because he never explained himself, everyone assumed the scale was small, ordinary, manageable. Vanessa especially. She believed Troy earned decent money consulting for transportation companies across Illinois and Wisconsin. Enough to survive, not enough to matter. She had no idea Bryant Harbor Capital even existed. The firm occupied the 22nd floor of a plain office building in downtown Chicago under a different holding company name. No interviews, no press photos, no public profile attached to Troy Bryant. Over 12 years, Troy quietly built enormous wealth, investing in freight corridors, warehouse automation, and railroad logistics, long before larger firms understood the market. He preferred anonymity. Money attracted noise. Noise ruined clarity. One Thursday evening, Troy returned home earlier than expected after a canceled meeting in Milwaukee. The house was dark except for kitchen lights. Vanessa was upstairs showering. Her phone sat charging on the marble counter. Troy walked past it at first. Then it buzzed. A message preview appeared across the screen. From Derek Holloway. Can't stop thinking about last night. Troy stopped walking. Water ran upstairs behind the ceiling. Steam hissed softly through the bathroom vent. The phone buzzed again. Once this gala is over, we won't have to pretend anymore. Troy looked at the message without touching the device. No anger crossed his face. No shock. Only stillness. Then another message appeared. Can't wait until the gala is finally ours. Troy slowly sat down at the kitchen island. Outside, snow drifted against the windows overlooking Halsted Street. He read the words again. Ours. Not hers. Not his. Ours. The language told him more than the affair itself. This was no impulsive mistake. It was strategic, shared, planned. Upstairs, Vanessa hummed faintly while cabinet drawers opened and closed. Troy finally stood. He walked into his office near the back of the house and opened a locked drawer beneath stacks of transportation reports. Inside sat a thin black notebook. He placed it on the desk carefully. Then he wrote 3 names: Vanessa Bryant, Derek Holloway, Vector Lane, AI, nothing else. Not yet. Because Troy Bryant understood something most angry men never learned. The first person who reacts usually loses. And for the first time in months, his marriage suddenly made perfect sense. Derek Holloway understood cameras better than most politicians. He knew how to hold eye contact half a second longer than necessary, knew how to lean forward during the interviews, like every question mattered deeply to him, knew how to smile without showing too much teeth. 41 years old, founder and CEO of Vector Lane AI. Business magazines called him the future of intelligent freight systems. Chicago social circles called him exciting. Troy Bryant called him predictable. The first time Troy saw Derek in person was at a rooftop networking event above the London House Hotel in downtown Chicago. Rain clouds hung low over the river that night. The city lights reflected off wet glass, while investors moved between champagne trays and startup founders, rehearsing polished conversations. Vanessa spotted Derek near the bar almost immediately. There he is, she said softly, not to Troy, to herself. Troy noticed the shift in her posture before she even started walking. Her shoulders straightened. Her expression brightened in a way it no longer did around him. Derek greeted her with easy confidence. "Vanessa Bryant," he said warmly, "Chicago's favorite philanthropist." Vanessa laughed harder than the sentence deserved. Then she remembered Troy standing beside her. "Oh," she said quickly, "this is my husband Troy." Derek shook his hand once. "Logistics consultant, right?" "That's right," Troy answered. "Interesting field." Derek replied automatically, already looking past him toward another investor approaching the table. Troy released the handshake first. The conversation moved on without him. For the next hour, he watched Derek work the room. Every movement looked practiced. Every joke landed exactly where intended. Derek spoke about artificial intelligence transforming freight distribution across America, about predictive shipping algorithms, about machine learning infrastructure. Most people around him nodded without understanding half the terminology. That was part of the strategy. Complicated language sounded expensive, and expensive attracted investors. Troy listened carefully from the edge of the rooftop while nursing a glass of sparkling water. Some claims were exaggerated, others were impossible. At one point, Derek described a predictive logistics model that supposedly reduced Midwest rail delays by 38%. Troy knew the exact rail systems Derek referenced. The data did not exist, which meant one of two things. Either Derek was lying, or vector lane AI was inventing numbers investors wanted to hear. Neither possibility surprised Troy. What interested him more was Vanessa. She stayed close to Derek the entire evening, too close. Her hand brushed his arm during conversations. She leaned toward him when he spoke. Her smile became softer around him than Troy had seen in years, but the most revealing detail came near the end of the event. A private equity manager named Colin Mercer asked Derek a direct question. "How much runway do you realistically have left?" Derek smiled without answering immediately. Vanessa jumped in before he could. "Once Chicago gets behind Vector Lane," she said confidently, "that won't be an issue anymore." Troy noticed Derek glance at her carefully after that. A shared understanding passed between them. Not romance, strategy. The affair mattered less to Troy than the partnership forming underneath it. That night, Troy drove home alone in the Avalon through light rain falling over Lakeshore Drive. Vanessa stayed behind with Derek after the event ended. She texted Troy 23 minutes later, "Going to dinner with donors. Don't wait up." Troy placed the phone face down beside the gear shift. His expression never changed. The next morning, he called Rachel Mercer. Rachel worked on the 34th floor of a steel and glass tower overlooking Wacker Drive. Mid-40s, precise, calm, one of the best financial divorce attorneys in Illinois. She opened the meeting without wasting time. "You think your wife is having an affair?" Troy sat across from her conference table. "Yes." "You want proof?" "No." Rachel looked up from her notes. "Then what do you want?" Troy slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed expense summaries connected to the upcoming Bryant Futures Scholarship Gala. Rachel scanned several pages: hotel expenditures, vendor contracts, entertainment invoices. Then she stopped at a highlighted line item. "Consulting Advanced Vector Lane AI." She frowned slightly. "Why is a startup receiving money connected to a nonprofit gala?" "That's what I'd like to understand." Rachel continued reading. The further she went, the quieter she became. Finally, she closed the folder. "How long have you suspected financial crossover?" "About 6 weeks." "And your wife has access to foundation relationships?" "Yes." Rachel leaned back slowly. "This could become ugly." Troy nodded once. "I know. Do you want to expose her? Tell me." That answer surprised her. Troy folded his hands calmly. "I want the truth documented correctly." Rachel studied him carefully after that. Most clients arrived furious, emotional, reckless. Troy sounded like a man organizing freight schedules. Cold, structured, intentional. Rachel opened her laptop. Then we start quietly. Over the next month, the investigation began. Not publicly, not dramatically, quietly. Rachel assembled a small forensic team to review financial activity surrounding the gala and several related donor accounts. Troy never interfered. He simply provided access. The results came quickly, too quickly. Vanessa had been introducing Derek to donors during private charity dinners across Chicago. Several wealthy board members had received presentations connected to Vector Lane AI immediately after foundation events. The lines between philanthropy and business solicitation were becoming dangerously blurred. Then came the transfers, small at first. $8,000 labeled innovation consulting, $12,000 for strategic development, $15,000 routed through a secondary vendor account. Individually, the numbers looked manageable. Together, they formed a pattern. One afternoon, Rachel called Troy while he reviewed warehouse acquisition proposals near Joliet. "You need to see this," she said. An hour later, Troy sat in her office studying printed email chains spread across the conference table. Vanessa had been actively lobbying board members to elevate Derek's public role at the gala. Potential keynote speaker, future innovation donor, strategic partner. But one sentence caught Troy's attention immediately. "We should minimize Troy's visibility during the event. Optics matter." No emotion crossed his face. Rachel watched him carefully. "You okay?" Troy kept reading. "Yes? You don't sound angry." Troy finally looked up. Anger wastes timing. Rachel said nothing after that, because she was beginning to understand something uncomfortable. Troy Bryant was not falling apart. He was preparing. 3 days later, Vanessa hosted a donor mixer inside their home. Luxury caterers filled the kitchen. Jazz music floated through hidden ceiling speakers. Expensive perfume and wine drifted through crowded rooms, while Chicago elites discussed philanthropy loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Troy arrived home shortly after 8, carrying dry cleaning over one arm. Nobody greeted him. Several guests barely looked at him. Vanessa spotted him entering the living room and walked over immediately. "You could have told me you were coming early." "This is my house," Troy answered calmly. Vanessa lowered her voice. "We're entertaining investors." Troy glanced across the room. Derek stood beside the fireplace holding a bourbon glass while speaking to 2 venture capital partners. When Derek noticed Troy watching him, he smiled politely, like a man acknowledging hotel staff. Troy handed Vanessa the dry cleaning. "Enjoy your evening." Then he walked upstairs toward his office. Halfway up the staircase, he paused. Below him, Derek laughed at something Vanessa whispered into his ear. The room laughed with him. Troy continued upstairs without turning around. Inside his office, he closed the door quietly and opened his laptop. An unread email sat waiting from Rachel Mercer. Subject line: "Someone is trying very hard to erase your name from this event." Troy opened the attachment. It was the preliminary gala branding layout, major donor recognition section, corporate sponsors, board acknowledgments, strategic innovation partners. His name appeared nowhere, not once. Troy leaned back slowly in his chair. Downstairs, the party continued beneath warm lighting and expensive music. Laughter echoed faintly through the floorboards. He stared at the document for a long moment before reaching for the black notebook again. Then he wrote a 4th name beneath the others, Rachel Mercer, because the next phase would require witnesses, and Troy Bryant had officially stopped hoping his marriage could still be saved. Long before Chicago donors shook Troy Bryant's hand without remembering his name, he had been a 17-year-old kid standing outside a closed grocery store on South Halsted Street, holding 2 overdue utility bills in frozen hands. The electricity at home had already been shut off once that winter. His mother worked night shifts at Mercy Hospital, 12 hours at a time, sometimes 14. She slept in short fragments and apologized constantly for things that were never her fault. Troy learned early that survival often sounded quiet, not dramatic, just exhausting. Their apartment in Southside Chicago smelled like radiator heat and cheap laundry detergent. Snow leaked through cracked window frames every January. His mother taped towels against the gaps to keep cold air from reaching the kitchen table where Troy studied at night. He rarely talked about those years. Not because he was ashamed, because nobody wealthy ever understood what constant financial pressure actually felt like. They thought poverty looked cinematic. It did not. It looked like calculating grocery totals before reaching the register. It looked like wearing the same winter coat 3 years in a row. It looked like pretending not to hear collection agencies calling after 8 p.m. By 17, Troy had nearly given up on college entirely. His grades were excellent. Teachers pushed him constantly toward engineering programs and business schools, but scholarships required time paperwork, interviews, transportation, things poor families struggled to manage while surviving. One afternoon, his guidance counselor stopped him outside class. "You got mail," she said. Troy still remembered the envelope, plain white, no return address. Inside sat a scholarship letter offering full tuition support through a private donor initiative connected to Illinois infrastructure development. No photographs, no ceremony, just opportunity. At the bottom of the page, one sentence stayed with him for years. "Someone once opened a door for me. This is your turn." That scholarship changed everything. Troy attended Northwestern University, graduated near the top of his class, entered freight logistics during a period when most investors ignored transportation, infrastructure, completely. He saw opportunity where others saw boredom. Rail systems, cargo routing, warehouse positioning, distribution timing, nothing glamorous, which meant nobody crowded the market early. By 34, Troy quietly owned stakes in multiple Midwest freight operations through layered holding companies and transportation funds. By 38, Bryant Harbor Capital managed assets large enough to attract institutional attention. Troy avoided it. No magazine interviews, no podcasts, no conference speeches. He understood something important about wealth. The louder people advertised money, the more desperately they usually needed approval. Troy only needed stability. And eventually he created the Bryant Futures Scholarship Initiative, the same kind of opportunity that once rescued him. Every year, hundreds of Chicago students from struggling neighborhoods receive scholarships connected to the program. Trade school grants, engineering tuition, nursing assistance, logistics apprenticeships. Most recipients never learned who funded it. Troy preferred it that way. The students mattered. Attention did not. Vanessa never understood that part of him. In her world, money existed to be seen, to shape status, to influence rooms. The idea of giving millions anonymously felt almost irrational to her. She knew an anonymous donor heavily financed the annual Bryant Futures Gala. She simply assumed the donor was some old East Coast billionaire hiding behind attorneys and family offices. She never imagined the man drinking coffee beside her every morning was writing the checks. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Troy sat alone inside a freight terminal office near Cicero, reviewing shipment reports when his phone rang. "Eleanor Whitmore." Troy answered immediately. "Good afternoon, Eleanor. You need to come downtown." Her voice sounded sharper than usual. What happened? Not over the phone. Troy glanced at the clock. 4:12 p.m. "I can be there in 40 minutes. Chicago Athletic Association," Eleanor said. "Library room upstairs." Then she hung up. Rain hammered downtown traffic by the time Troy reached Michigan Avenue. The old private club smelled faintly of leather furniture and polished wood. Men in tailored overcoats drank whiskey near fireplaces, while muted conversations floated beneath dim amber lighting. Eleanor Whitmore sat alone at a corner table upstairs. 70 years old, old money Chicago philanthropy, elegant without trying. She looked irritated. That immediately concerned Troy. Eleanor rarely showed emotion publicly. He sat across from her quietly. "You sounded serious." "I am." A waiter approached. Troy ordered black coffee. Eleanor slid a thin folder across the table. Read page 3. Troy opened it slowly. Budget restructuring proposal. Gala sponsorship modifications. New innovation partnership tier. Vector Lane AI. Derek Holloway. Troy kept reading. Several donor recognition changes followed underneath. Strategic visibility recommendations. Keynote integration. Brand alignment opportunities. Then he saw it. Primary donor designation temporarily withheld pending restructuring review. Translation. Someone was trying to remove him completely. Eleanor folded her hands. Vanessa pushed aggressively for these changes. How aggressively she threatened donor withdrawals. Troy nodded once. That sounded accurate. Eleanor studied his face carefully. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not." The waiter placed coffee between them. Neither touched it immediately. Finally, Eleanor lowered her voice. "There's more." She removed another document. Expense discrepancies. Several transactions lacked proper authorization records. Luxury hospitality charges. Consulting payments. Travel reimbursements connected indirectly to Vector Lane AI. Not enough yet for public scandal. Enough for concern. "How bad?" Troy asked quietly. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "If this expands, the foundation could suffer serious reputational damage." Outside the windows, rain blurred Michigan Avenue into streaks of white and gold headlights. Troy continued reading silently. Eleanor watched him carefully. "You should reveal yourself," she finally said. "This would stop immediately if the board knew who you were." Troy closed the folder. "No?" Eleanor frowned. "They're using your money." "I know." "Then why protect them?" Troy looked toward the rain outside. "Because timing matters." Eleanor leaned back slowly. For the first time that evening, she seemed to understand the direction this was moving. Troy was not defending Vanessa anymore. He was documenting her. "What do you need from me?" she asked quietly. "Nothing public yet." "That may not remain possible." "I know." Eleanor hesitated. Then she slid over one final page. An itemized jewelry invoice. Cartier. Oak Street location. $48,000. Payment Source Foundation. Operational account. Troy stared at the total for several seconds. Not because of the money, because Vanessa once criticized him for repairing his old winter coat instead of buying a new one. The memory surfaced unexpectedly. "You still wear that thing," she had laughed. "Yes." "You look like a substitute math teacher." Now he sat staring at nearly $50,000 in charity money spent on diamonds. Eleanor spoke carefully. "I wanted you to see this before the auditors do." Troy nodded once. "You were right to call me." A long silence settled between them. Then Eleanor asked the question that finally mattered. "What are you going to do?" Troy placed the invoice back inside the folder with calm precision. "Exactly what I should have done earlier." "And what's that?" Troy looked directly at her. "Finish collecting evidence." Rain continued striking the windows softly while downtown Chicago disappeared into evening darkness. For the first time since discovering the affair, Troy felt something colder than disappointment settling into place. Clarity. And clarity made decisions easier. As he stood to leave, Eleanor stopped him. "There's one more thing." Troy paused. The final seating chart for the gala arrived this morning. Something in her expression changed, almost embarrassment. "He moved your table." Troy said nothing. Eleanor slid him the printed chart, table 38, near the ballroom service entrance beside catering access doors, far from investors, far from cameras, far from Vanessa. Troy stared at the paper quietly, then folded it once, carefully, like something fragile. Troy Bryant arrived at Bryant Futures Foundation headquarters before sunrise the next morning. The building stood near LaSalle Street between law firms and financial offices, where men in $1,000 overcoats rushed through revolving doors carrying coffee and stress. The foundation occupied 3 quiet floors, minimal branding, no giant donor walls. That had always been Troy's preference. The receptionist greeted him softly as he entered. "Good morning, Mr. Bryant." Troy nodded once. "Is Marcus Reed here yet?" "He arrived 20 minutes ago." Of course he did. Marcus Reed had the kind of reputation people earned after years of uncovering fraud nobody else noticed. Mid-50s, former forensic accountant for federal investigations, calm voice, brutal attention to detail. Troy found him inside a glass conference room surrounded by printed financial statements. Marcus barely looked up. "You were right," he said immediately. That was never a comforting sentence. Troy sat down across from him. How deep? Marcus removed his glasses slowly. Still hard to tell. Stacks of documents covered the table. Expense reports, wire authorizations, vendor invoices, hotel contracts. Marcus tapped several highlighted pages. Somebody's been moving money through layered event expenses. Amount so far, around $270,000. Troy remained still. Marcus continued. "Could be more once we finish tracing secondary vendors." The room fell quiet except for traffic, humming faintly outside the windows. Most people hearing those numbers connected to charity funds would react emotionally, anger, shock, threats. Troy simply asked, "How sloppy?" Marcus almost smiled. Sloppy enough that they assumed nobody important was watching. That answer told Troy everything. Vanessa never feared consequences because she never believed quiet people controlled systems. She believed power looked loud, visible, aggressive. People like Derek Holloway reinforced that worldview constantly. Marcus slid another folder across the table. "These concern me more." Troy opened it. A series of consulting agreements linked indirectly to Vector Lane AI. Several signatures appeared electronically approved through Vanessa's access credentials. Projected Innovation Partnership Development. "Any evidence?" Derek knew Troy asked. Marcus leaned back carefully. "Not directly yet, but his company benefited." Troy studied the documents in silence. The danger was growing larger than infidelity now. Affairs destroyed marriages every day. Financial misconduct involving charitable foundations destroyed lives. Marcus lowered his voice. "If regulators see this before internal counsel controls the narrative, the foundation could lose donor confidence overnight." Troy nodded once. "That won't happen." Marcus looked at him carefully after that. "You already have a plan." "Yes." "You going public?" "No." Marcus frowned slightly. "You should." Troy closed the folder. "This isn't about humiliation." "Then what is it about?" Troy's answer came instantly. "Protection." The word lingered between them, because Troy understood the real threat now. Not Vanessa, not Derek. Panic. If this exploded publicly before evidence was organized, properly donors would flee. Scholarship programs would freeze. Students waiting for tuition support would suffer because adults chased ego and status. Troy would not allow that. At 10:30, Eleanor Whitmore entered the conference room carrying another stack of papers. She looked exhausted. "I just got off the phone with 2 board members," she said. "Vanessa's still pushing for Derek to become keynote sponsor." Marcus gave a dry laugh. "While siphoning money into his company. She doesn't think anyone knows." Troy stood and walked toward the window, overlooking downtown Chicago. Snow drifted lightly between buildings. Below, the city moved normally. People crossing streets, taxis honking, construction workers unloading steel beams. Entire lives continuing without any awareness that several powerful reputations were quietly collapsing upstairs. Eleanor stepped beside him. You still haven't told her no. She's going to find out eventually. Troy looked down at the street. Yes, but not from me. Eleanor studied him carefully. You really loved her. Troy stayed silent for several seconds. Then, yes, not dramatic, not emotional, just factual. Eleanor seemed almost saddened by how calmly he said it. At noon, Troy left the foundation and drove toward Oak Street. The Cartier boutique sat among luxury storefronts where winter coats cost more than some Chicago families earned in months. Inside, warm lighting reflected across glass jewelry displays. An associate greeted him politely, though not enthusiastically. Troy still looked like a man who repaired his own gutters on weekends. I'm looking for a recent purchase record, he said calmly. The associate's expression tightened immediately. I'm sorry, sir, we can't disclose customer. Troy placed a business card on the counter. Bryant Harbor Capital. The reaction changed instantly. Recognition. Professional caution. The associate disappeared into a back office for several minutes before returning with a manager. Mr. Bryant, the manager said carefully, how can we help you? Troy showed the invoice copy Eleanor provided earlier. I only need confirmation this transaction occurred. The manager reviewed the document briefly, then nodded once. It did? Who collected the item? I'm not authorized to discuss customer details. Troy accepted that answer without argument. He already knew enough. As he turned to leave, the manager added quietly, it was a diamond panther necklace. Troy paused near the door. $48,000, foundation money, on jewelry. For a moment, he remembered Vanessa standing in their closet months earlier, criticizing his winter coat again. You realize wealthy men don't keep jackets for 10 years, right? Troy had smiled slightly. This one still works. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Now he stood inside Cartier, realizing she had used scholarship money to buy luxury diamonds while mocking him for repairing clothing. The irony felt almost clinical, not painful anymore, just revealing. That evening, Troy returned home shortly after sunset. Vanessa sat at the kitchen island surrounded by Gala seating layouts and floral design samples. A half-finished glass of wine rested beside her laptop. She looked irritated before he even spoke. Where were you? Working. You missed dinner with the Sloan donors. Troy removed his coat slowly. I wasn't invited. Vanessa exhaled sharply. Can you not do this tonight? Do with this passive-aggressive thing. Troy looked at her calmly. I said one sentence. Vanessa rubbed her forehead. You know how important this gala is? Yes. Then why are you acting like none of it matters? Troy loosened his tie. Because appearances matter less than outcomes. Vanessa gave a tired laugh. That's exactly why nobody notices you in these rooms. The sentence landed hard enough that most husbands would have reacted immediately. Troy did not. He walked toward the refrigerator quietly. Vanessa watched him with growing frustration. You know, Derek understands how this world works. There it was again. Derek. Always Derek now. Troy poured a glass of water. How is Vector Lane doing? The question caught her off guard. Fine. Still raising capital. Vanessa narrowed her eyes slightly. Why curious? He's doing very well. Troy nodded once. Good. The calmness unsettled her more than anger would have, because Vanessa expected emotional reactions. Silence forced her to fill space herself. You could learn a lot from him, honestly. Troy drank water slowly. Could I? Yes. Her tone sharpened. He actually takes risks. He knows how to build something visible. Troy set the glass down carefully. I see. Vanessa stared at him. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed her face, like she suddenly realized she no longer understood the man standing in front of her. Then her phone buzzed beside the laptop. Derek's name flashed across the screen. Vanessa grabbed it too quickly. Troy noticed? Of course he noticed. But he simply picked up his coat again. I have some work upstairs. Troy. He paused. Vanessa hesitated strangely, almost guilty, almost human again. But the moment disappeared quickly. You'll wear a newer tuxedo to the gala this year, right? Troy looked at her for several seconds, then answered quietly, No. And upstairs in his office later that night, another email arrived from the foundation event team. Updated seating confirmation attached. Troy opened the document. Table 38 remained unchanged. Beside service doors, near catering traffic, farthest possible distance from Vanessa and Derek's VIP table. At the bottom of the email sat one final note. Please avoid entering donor photography areas unless requested by event staff. Troy stared at the sentence, then slowly closed the laptop, because someone had officially crossed the line from disrespect into deliberate humiliation, and Troy Bryant had finally stopped protecting them in his mind. 3 weeks before the gala, the Blackstone Hotel ballroom stopped looking like a charity event and started looking like a political convention. Production crews rolled in before dawn every morning. Electricians climbed scaffolding beneath crystal chandeliers. Floral designers carried towering white orchid arrangements through marble corridors, while event coordinators barked instructions into wireless headsets. Every detail mattered now. Lighting, camera angles, VIP seating, press placement. Vanessa Bryant treated the event like a coronation. She arrived daily in tailored cream coats and oversized sunglasses despite Chicago's freezing wind, cutting through downtown streets hard enough to make tourists regret visiting the city. People moved differently around her now, faster, more carefully. The closer the gala came, the more power Vanessa seemed to believe she possessed. Troy noticed it immediately. At foundation meetings, she interrupted board members more aggressively, corrected hotel staff in front of others, started referring to Derek Holloway as our innovation partner before any official board approval existed. And Derek embraced the attention naturally. That was his real talent, adaptation. He knew exactly how to mirror whatever room he entered. With investors, he sounded analytical. With politicians, visionary. With wealthy donors, humble enough to appear grateful while still implying exclusivity. Troy watched all of it quietly from the edges. One Thursday afternoon, he entered the ballroom during setup while crews tested stage lighting across massive LED screens, displaying scholarship recipient photos. Nobody noticed him at first. Workers rushed past carrying cables and floral crates while Vanessa stood near the center aisle, speaking with a media consultant. Derek stood beside her, in a navy cashmere overcoat, laughing softly at something she said. The giant screens behind them displayed the foundation logo. Bryant Futures Initiative. Troy paused near the back wall. The irony sat almost absurdly in front of him. His name towered 30 feet high across the ballroom. Yet nobody there understood the man standing beneath it had built the entire foundation. Vanessa finally spotted him. Her smile faded slightly. "Troy?" she said, surprised. "What are you doing here meeting with Eleanor?" Vanessa glanced toward Derek briefly before answering. "We're in the middle of media prep." "I noticed." Derek approached with polished confidence. "Hey, Troy?" Troy nodded once. "Derek." The younger media consultant nearby looked confused for half a second, likely trying to understand why Vanessa's husband dressed like an accountant while Derek looked like a billionaire startup founder from a magazine cover. Derek gestured toward the stage. "It's coming together beautifully." "Yes," Troy answered calmly. "Expensive, too?" Vanessa's tone sharpened slightly. "That's usually how successful events work. Troy looked around slowly. The imported floral walls, custom LED installations, premium liquor stations, handmade donor gift boxes stacked near the entrance. He knew the exact cost of every single item because he approved the emergency funding transfers personally 2 nights earlier. The gala budget had nearly collapsed after 2 corporate sponsors quietly reduced contributions during market volatility. Vanessa never learned about it. She only knew the money appeared, just like always. Eleanor Whitmore emerged from a side corridor moments later. Her eyes immediately moved between Troy, Vanessa, and Derek. The tension was becoming impossible to hide now. "Mr. Holloway," Eleanor said coolly, "I need Vanessa for a moment." Derek smiled politely. "Of course." As Vanessa walked away with Eleanor, Derek remained beside Troy near the back of the ballroom. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Derek folded his hands casually. "You know," he said, "Vanessa really carries this organization." Troy looked toward the stage lights. "She works hard. She's ambitious." "Yes." Derek studied him carefully. Most men in his position would have shown resentment by now, insecurity, competition. But Troy's calmness made reading him difficult. Derek finally smiled faintly. "You ever think about doing something bigger for yourself?" Troy turned slightly. "Bigger than what? I don't know." Derek shrugged. Something visible. The sentence almost amused him. Troy had spent years building systems powerful enough to influence freight movement across multiple states. But because none of it looked glamorous, men like Derek assumed he lacked ambition. Troy answered simply, "Visibility is overrated." Derek laughed softly. "That sounds like something people say after they give up." The comment hung there deliberately, a test. Troy remained completely still. Then he replied, "Or after they win." Derek's smile weakened for the first time, not because of the words, because Troy delivered them without ego, like fact. Before Derek could respond, Vanessa returned. "We need to go over seating placements," she told Derek quickly. Then to Troy, "You should probably avoid the front section tonight. Media teams are rehearsing camera movement." Troy nodded once. "Of course." The dismissal sounded casual, but deliberate. Everything had become deliberate now. Later that evening, Troy met Eleanor inside a smaller conference suite upstairs overlooking Michigan Avenue. She closed the door behind them immediately. "She's getting reckless." Troy sat calmly at the long oak table. "What happened?" Eleanor slid several printed emails toward him. Vanessa had authorized additional spending again without full board approval. Luxury transportation, expanded VIP hospitality, private donor dinners connected indirectly to Derek's investor meetings. Eleanor rubbed her forehead tiredly. "She's turning the gala into a startup networking event." Troy read silently. "What's the current budget exposure?" "Over 600,000 above original projections." "And covered." Eleanor hesitated. "Yes." Because Troy kept quietly filling financial gaps before public embarrassment occurred. Hotel vendors received payment extensions. Audio contractors got emergency transfers. Security deposits cleared overnight. No one asked questions because no one saw the source. Troy leaned back slowly. "And Derek. He's still pitching investors privately." Eleanor's frustration sharpened. He used a scholarship dinner to arrange meetings with venture capital firms from New York. Troy nodded once, exactly as expected. The foundation had become leverage, a credibility shield, and Vanessa either failed to see it or simply did not care anymore. Eleanor looked directly at him. "You realize she's humiliating you publicly now?" Troy stayed silent. "She moved your seating again yesterday." That finally caught his attention, to where Eleanor almost looked embarrassed answering, near the ballroom kitchen entrance. For a moment the room became completely still, not emotionally, strategically, because Troy understood what Vanessa was doing now. She was trying to erase him socially before removing him personally. Distance first, embarrassment second, replacement third. Classic escalation. Eleanor's voice softened slightly. You don't deserve this. Troy looked down at the seating chart quietly, then folded it carefully into his coat pocket. That's not important. It should be. No, Troy answered calmly. What's important is making sure the foundation survives what comes next. Eleanor stared at him for several seconds. You already know how this ends. Yes. And you're still protecting the organization. Yes. Outside the window, snow began falling over downtown Chicago again. White flakes drifted through traffic lights and skyscraper reflections, while the city prepared for another freezing night. Troy stood slowly. There's one more thing, Eleanor said. He paused. We received an updated guest behavior memo from Vanessa's event team. Troy turned slightly. Eleanor handed him the printed document. Near the bottom, one sentence had been highlighted by someone anonymously before reaching her desk. Please ensure Mr. Troy Bryant remains outside primary donor photography areas unless specifically requested. Troy read the sentence twice, not because it hurt, because it clarified everything. Vanessa no longer saw him as her husband, only as an inconvenience to the image she was constructing beside Derek Holloway. Troy folded the paper once, then placed it beside the seating chart inside his coat pocket. Evidence? Nothing more. But downstairs in the ballroom, beneath chandeliers and scholarship banners, workers continued preparing the stage where Vanessa Bryant planned to celebrate a future that already no longer existed. The night of the gala arrived beneath freezing rain and black Chicago skies. Downtown traffic crawled along Michigan Avenue, while black SUVs lined up outside the Blackstone Hotel entrance, like a parade of polished money and controlled smiles. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers reflected across hundreds of wine glasses, arranged with military precision. A string quartet played near the marble staircase, while photographers moved through donors and politicians, hunting useful faces. Every table carried scholarship cards featuring students whose lives had been changed by the Bryant Futures Initiative. Most guests admired the stories for less than 10 seconds before returning to conversations about investments and social positioning. Troy Bryant arrived alone at 6:42 p.m., not fashionably late, not dramatically early, exactly on time. The valet barely looked at the old silver Avalon before handing the keys to a younger attendant with visible confusion. Troy stepped from the car wearing the same tuxedo Vanessa complained about for years. Black, simple, tailored properly. The white cuff showed slight wear near the buttons if someone looked closely enough. Nobody did. Rainwater glistened across the hotel entrance behind him as he walked quietly through revolving doors into warmth and noise. Several guests glanced at him briefly before dismissing him almost instantly. Wrong watch, wrong car, wrong energy. Troy moved through the ballroom calmly. Waiters carrying champagne passed beside him without offering trays at first. One younger bartender near the back asked politely if he was with hotel operations. Troy answered simply, no, then continued walking. The ballroom looked magnificent. Massive projection screens displayed scholarship recipients smiling beside acceptance letters and college campuses. White orchids climbed gold display columns near the stage, while soft amber lighting washed across the ceiling. Troy noticed several last-minute additions immediately. Extra floral walls, additional LED installations, expanded premium liquor stations. Vanessa had overspent again. He knew because the emergency transfer request reached his office 48 hours earlier. $212,000, approved personally, quietly, as always. From across the ballroom, Vanessa finally spotted him. For half a second, irritation crossed her face. Then the social smile returned instantly as donors approached her table. She looked stunning tonight. Silver gown, diamond necklace from Cartier resting against her collarbone. Troy recognized it immediately. Scholarship money. Vanessa excused herself from a group of board members and walked toward him carefully. "You actually wore it," she said quietly. "The tuxedo." "Yes, it still fits." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Troy tonight is important." "I know. Then please don't make things awkward." Troy looked around the ballroom slowly. "I'm standing here, you know what I mean." Before he could answer, Derek Holloway approached, holding a glass of bourbon. Perfect timing, as usual. "There he is," Derek said smoothly. "Man of the hour." The joke carried just enough edge to sound harmless publicly. Vanessa gave a restrained laugh. Troy remained calm. "Good evening, Derek." Derek glanced briefly at Troy's watch. Still the Casio. Still the old tuxedo. Still invisible. "You sitting near the back tonight?" Derek asked casually. "That's the plan." Vanessa crossed her arms. "It's just easier for photography." Troy nodded once. "Of course." A photographer approached suddenly. "Vanessa, Derek, can I grab one near the donor wall?" Vanessa immediately straightened. Derek smiled toward the camera naturally. The photographer barely acknowledged Troy standing beside them. "Perfect," he said. "Just you two. Not husband and wife. Just Vanessa and Derek." Troy stepped aside before anyone asked him to. The flashes began immediately. He watched Vanessa lean slightly toward Derek beneath giant scholarship banners funded entirely by his money. Neither of them noticed Eleanor Whitmore observing from across the ballroom. But Troy did. Eleanor's expression darkened visibly. Good, Troy thought quietly. Let her see it herself. The gala officially began 20 minutes later. Guests moved toward assigned tables while servers poured wine beneath soft jazz music. Table 38 sat exactly where Eleanor described. Near the ballroom service entrance, beside swinging kitchen doors, where catering staff moved constantly carrying trays and silverware. The seat placement was not accidental. Troy understood that immediately. People at neighboring tables glanced toward him occasionally with polite confusion. Several likely assumed he was an accountant or low-level operations donor invited through charity connections. None recognized him. That part almost amused him now. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa took the stage beside Derek and Eleanor for opening remarks. Spotlights washed over them while cameras rolled from multiple angles. Vanessa spoke beautifully, confident, emotional, practiced. She talked about opportunity, education, community investment, and building futures for underprivileged students across Illinois. The audience applauded repeatedly. Troy listened quietly. While cutting steak, no one else at his table seemed interested in eating. Then Derek stepped forward. He spoke about innovation, artificial intelligence, the future of logistics. Together, Derek announced confidently, "We're creating pathways that connect technology and human potential." More applause. Troy noticed several investors nodding approvingly near the front tables. Derek was good, very good. That made him dangerous. After speeches ended, guests spread across the ballroom again for cocktails and networking. Troy remained seated near the back for several minutes, watching patterns develop. Who approached whom? Which investors followed Derek? Which board members avoided Eleanor? Which reporters focused cameras exclusively on Vanessa and Derek together? Everything told a story. Around 9:15 p.m., Troy finally stood and walked toward the center bar area. He found Vanessa near the donor wall speaking with two political donors from Evanston. The moment she saw him approaching, tension entered her posture. "Excuse us 1 second," she told the donors quickly. They stepped aside near a champagne tower. Vanessa lowered her voice immediately. "What are you doing talking to my wife?" "Not here." Troy studied her calmly. "We need to discuss the audit." Color faded slightly from her face. "What audit? The foundation accounts?" Vanessa glanced around quickly. Are you insane? No, you're seriously bringing this up tonight. It became serious before tonight. Vanessa's breathing sharpened. Across the ballroom, Derek noticed them speaking and started moving closer. Troy continued quietly. You need to stop moving money immediately. Vanessa stared at him. Then something shifted behind her eyes. Not guilt, fear. Because for the first time she realized Troy knew more than expected. You've been going through my accounts, the foundation's accounts. You have no right. I funded the foundation. The sentence almost slipped out naturally, but Troy stopped himself 1 second too early. Vanessa misunderstood the pause completely. She laughed once, cold, disbelieving. You funded nothing, Troy. Derek arrived beside them at that exact moment. Everything okay here? Vanessa looked furious now. He's trying to start drama. I'm trying to prevent legal exposure. Derek's expression hardened slightly. Maybe tonight isn't the time. Troy turned toward him. No. Actually, it is. The tension sharpened instantly. Nearby conversation slowed. Several guests began noticing raised voices. Vanessa stepped closer to Troy, embarrassment flooding across her face as more eyes turned toward them. You are not doing this to me tonight. Telling the truth. You don't even belong in this room. The words landed louder than she intended. Silence spread outward in waves. Several nearby donors turned fully now. Derek reached lightly toward her arm, Vanessa. But she was already spiraling. Years of resentment, embarrassment, social pressure, all collapsing together under public attention. She grabbed the nearest wine glass from a passing server tray, then hurled the Cabernet directly at Troy's chest. Red wine exploded across his white tuxedo shirt. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. Wine dripped slowly from Troy's collar onto polished marble floors, while hundreds of eyes locked onto him. But Troy Bryant never moved, not 1 inch. Across the ballroom entrance, Eleanor Whitmore turned toward the commotion. She saw the wine, saw Vanessa, saw Troy standing completely still beneath scholarship banners carrying his family name. And then Eleanor began walking toward them with an expression that made several board members immediately step aside. The ballroom stayed silent long enough for wine to drip from Troy Bryant's cuff onto the marble floor, 1 drop at a time. Vanessa stood frozen beside him, chest rising too quickly now as reality caught up with impulse. The empty wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. Derek Holloway immediately stepped forward. Everyone, let's just calm down, don't. Eleanor Whitmore's voice cut across the ballroom, sharp enough to stop him mid-sentence. She reached them seconds later, 70 years old, perfect posture, eyes cold enough to silence donors, politicians, and board members without raising her voice. Her gaze moved first to Troy's stained tuxedo, then to Vanessa. What, Eleanor asked carefully, did you just do? Vanessa swallowed hard. She was trying to explain, Derek began. I wasn't speaking to you. The sentence landed like a slap. Several nearby guests quietly stepped backward. Reporters near the stage stopped pretending not to watch. Troy removed a folded handkerchief from his pocket and calmly wiped wine from his collar. No anger, no embarrassment. That frightened Vanessa more than shouting would have. Eleanor looked directly at her. Do you have any idea who just paid for this ballroom? Vanessa blinked once. What the ballroom? Eleanor repeated. The scholarships. The emergency funding that saved this gala 3 separate times in the last month. Confusion spread visibly across Vanessa's face. Derek spoke carefully now. Eleanor, maybe this isn't the place. Oh, this is exactly the place. Her voice echoed across the suddenly silent ballroom. Every nearby conversation had stopped completely now. Guests openly stared. Waiters stood motionless, holding silver trays. Even the string quartet near the stage remained frozen with instruments lowered. Eleanor turned slowly toward the crowd. For 7 years, she announced the largest donor behind the Bryant Futures Initiative has remained anonymous by personal choice. Several board members exchanged nervous looks. Vanessa stared at Eleanor, then at Troy, then back again. "No," she whispered. Eleanor ignored her. "That donor," she continued calmly, "is Troy Bryant." The silence afterward felt physical. One donor near the front actually laughed softly in disbelief before realizing nobody else was laughing. A political consultant lowered his champagne glass halfway without blinking. 2 reporters immediately grabbed phones. Vanessa's expression emptied completely. "What?" The word barely came out. Troy finally looked at her directly. "You should sit down." But she didn't move. "That's impossible." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "No. What's impossible is the amount of disrespect this foundation has shown the man financing most of it." Derek recovered first. People like him always recovered quickly. He stepped forward with a controlled smile. "Well," he said carefully, "this is obviously a misunderstanding involving donor privacy, and it involves financial misconduct." Troy interrupted calmly. Derek stopped talking. Not because Troy raised his voice, because he didn't. The quietness forced everyone to listen harder. Troy reached into his inside coat pocket and removed a folded document packet protected in clear plastic. Even stained with wine, his hands remained steady. "I requested internal review 3 weeks ago," he said. The results became impossible to ignore. Vanessa stared at him like she no longer recognized his face. "What are you talking about?" Troy handed the folder directly to Eleanor. She opened it immediately. Inside sat printed wire transfers, expense reports, authorization logs, and consulting payments connected to Vector Lane AI. Marcus Reed appeared from the side corridor at almost the exact same moment. He carried another stack of documents beneath one arm. The timing was intentional. Vanessa noticed that immediately. Her breathing changed again. "You planned this?" Troy answered honestly, "No." His eyes moved briefly toward the wine staining his shirt. "But I prepared for it." Derek's calmness finally cracked slightly. "This is insane," he snapped. "You're accusing us publicly based on accounting confusion?" Marcus Reed stepped beside Eleanor. "It's not confusion." The forensic auditor's voice sounded flat and professional. Several foundation expenditures were redirected into unauthorized hospitality consulting and investor acquisition channels. A low wave of murmuring spread through nearby guests. Investor acquisition. Everyone in the ballroom understood exactly what that implied. Derek forced a laugh. "My company never received foundation money." Marcus handed Eleanor another page. Vector Lane AI linked accounts received multiple indirect transfers through secondary vendor structures. Vanessa looked between them wildly. "No, wait. 12 transfers." Marcus continued calmly. "Currently documented." Troy watched the room shift around them. This was the moment powerful people always recognized danger. Not during yelling, during paperwork. Donors who once admired Derek now studied him differently. Calculating risk. Political figures quietly stepped farther away from Vanessa. One board member actually removed his foundation name badge entirely. Troy noticed everything. Years in logistics taught him that systems failed gradually before collapsing all at once. This ballroom had entered collapse. Vanessa finally turned toward Troy fully. "You did this to me." The accusation sounded almost desperate. Troy looked exhausted more than angry. "No," he answered quietly. "You did." The words hit harder because they carried no performance, no revenge, only truth. Derek straightened his posture aggressively. "This is a setup." Rachel Mercer appeared beside the ballroom entrance almost on cue. Dark coat, leather briefcase, controlled expression. "No," she said calmly. "It's documentation." Derek's face tightened instantly. Rachel approached slowly. "My office has already secured copies of financial records, email archives, vendor contracts, and communication logs tied to the foundation. Vanessa looked physically pale now. What emails? Rachel opened the briefcase. Projected donor integration strategy, strategic visibility adjustments, private investor dinners coordinated through scholarship events. And finally, we should minimize Troy's visibility during the event. Optics matter. Rachel handed the printed email directly to Eleanor. Vanessa's lips parted slightly. She remembered writing it immediately. Around them, several donors openly stared now without pretending otherwise. Humiliation had reversed direction. Troy felt no satisfaction from it, only inevitability. Because once systems began exposing, truth emotion became irrelevant. Eleanor looked furious now in a way Troy had never seen publicly. "You used scholarship infrastructure," she said coldly, "to market a private startup." Derek immediately pushed back. "That's not illegal." "No," Rachel answered calmly, "but unauthorized financial diversion tied to nonprofit operations absolutely can." Several people nearby quietly stepped even farther away from Derek after hearing that. The ballroom no longer looked glamorous. It looked dangerous. Vanessa suddenly grabbed Troy's arm, hard. "You can stop this." Troy looked down at her hand on his sleeve stained with wine. "You should let go. Troy. You humiliated yourself tonight, Vanessa, not me." The sentence nearly broke her composure completely, because for the first time all evening, she realized something horrifying. Troy Bryant had never been weak. He had simply been patient. Marcus Reed approached Eleanor again and handed her one final sheet. She scanned it silently, then looked directly at Derek. "This transfer," she said, "slowly leads directly to an account connected to Vector Lane AI operational funding." The room reacted instantly. Even Derek lost control of his expression for half a second. Only half. But Troy saw it. Fear. Real fear. Not social embarrassment. Financial fear. The dangerous kind. Reporters began moving closer openly now. Phones lifted, whispers intensified. One donor quietly told his assistant to contact legal counsel immediately. Another walked directly toward the exit. Vanessa stepped backward, unsteadily. "No." Derek moved beside her quickly. "We're leaving." "No," Eleanor answered sharply. Nobody moved. Then Eleanor turned toward Marcus. "Contact outside counsel tonight." Marcus nodded. "And notify the rest of the board." "Yes." Rachel closed her briefcase slowly. "There's one more issue." Everyone looked toward her. "The financial irregularities may exceed nonprofit jurisdiction thresholds." The ballroom went still again, because every executive, donor, and attorney in that room understood what she was implying. Federal attention. Vanessa looked at Troy one final time, not with anger now, with disbelief, as though her entire marriage had suddenly become unrecognizable in a single hour. But Troy only stood quietly beneath scholarship banners carrying his name while red wine dried across his shirt. And for the first time all night, nobody in the ballroom looked past him anymore. The ballroom emptied in layers. First the politicians, then the cautious donors, then the investors, who suddenly remembered early flights and urgent calls waiting outside. By midnight, the Blackstone Hotel no longer looked like a celebration. It looked like the aftermath of a corporate disaster. Half-drunk wine glasses remained abandoned across white tablecloths. Scholarship brochures lay scattered beside untouched desserts, while exhausted hotel staff quietly dismantled floral displays worth more than most Chicago families earned in months. Troy Bryant stood near the ballroom entrance, speaking calmly with Rachel Mercer, while workers rolled lighting equipment past them. His tuxedo shirt was still stained dark red. He had not bothered changing. Across the room, Vanessa sat alone at a corner table staring at her phone, while Derek argued quietly with someone near the elevators. Nobody approached either of them anymore. That change happened fast. Powerful people avoided risk instinctively, and tonight, Vanessa and Derek suddenly looked radioactive. Rachel opened her tablet. We pulled preliminary banking records from the secondary vendor accounts. Troy nodded. How bad? Rachel exhaled slowly. Worse than we thought. She rotated the screen toward him. A series of financial transfers appeared organized by date. Aspen luxury resort payments, private aviation deposits, executive hospitality expenses, high-end restaurant charges in Chicago, Austin, and Miami. Many routed indirectly through Gala vendors or consulting intermediaries. One number caught Troy's attention immediately. $78,000, Destination Vector Lane Strategic Development. Rachel tapped the line item. That payment cleared 3 months ago. Approved by who? Vanessa's credentials. Troy studied the screen quietly. The affair no longer mattered at all. This had become greed. Simple and ugly. Marcus Reed joined them carrying another document box. We found additional invoice layering. Rachel looked up sharply. How much? Marcus set the box down heavily, still calculating, but enough to trigger mandatory disclosure obligations. Troy remained calm. What's the cleanest path? Marcus answered immediately. Internal cooperation before external discovery. Rachel nodded once. If regulators think the foundation tried hiding, this everything gets worse. Troy looked across the ballroom toward scholarship banners still hanging above the stage. Students depended on those funds. Kids from neighborhoods identical to the one where he grew up. None of them deserved damage from this scandal. That remained the only part truly making him angry now. Vanessa suddenly approached, slowly, like someone walking toward an unstable ledge. Her makeup looked imperfect for the first time in years. Mascara faintly smudged beneath one eye. The confidence that usually shaped every movement had vanished completely. Troy, she said quietly. Rachel stepped aside without speaking. Vanessa stopped 3 feet away from him. We need to talk privately. We are private enough. She glanced nervously toward Marcus and Rachel. Troy, please. He studied her face for several seconds. The panic was real now. Not emotional panic, consequences panic. You should call an attorney, he said calmly. Vanessa looked stunned. You're serious? Yes. Her breathing sharpened. You're going to destroy me over accounting mistakes, Rachel answered before Troy could. These aren't accounting mistakes. Vanessa ignored her completely. Her eyes stayed locked on Troy. You know I never meant for any of this to happen. Troy's expression remained unreadable. Which part? The question hit harder than shouting would have. Vanessa looked away briefly. The money got complicated. No, Troy answered quietly. It got dishonest. She stepped closer. You don't understand how these people operate. Troy almost smiled at that. Because Vanessa still fundamentally misunderstood him. She believed quietness meant ignorance. Like a man who drove an old Toyota could not possibly understand how wealthy systems worked. But Troy built his fortune studying systems, especially corrupt ones. I understand perfectly, he said. Vanessa lowered her voice desperately. Derek said the transfers would be temporary. There it was. Not denial anymore, confirmation. Rachel immediately typed something into her tablet. Vanessa noticed too late. Oh my God. Troy said nothing. Because silence forced truth out faster now. Vanessa rubbed both hands against her forehead. He told me investors were close. He said once the funding round closed, everything would be paid back. And you believed him? Yes. The answer came small. Embarrassingly small. For the first time in years, Troy saw something underneath Vanessa's ambition. Fear of becoming ordinary. Fear powerful enough to make intelligent people reckless. Across the ballroom, Derek noticed Vanessa speaking openly with Troy and started moving toward them quickly, too quickly. Rachel noticed immediately. So did I, Marcus muttered. Derek reached the table with forced calm. We should leave. Vanessa looked at him uncertainly. Troy Derek cut her off. Do not say another word. Troy finally looked directly at him. You should probably stop giving instructions. Derek's jaw tightened. You think this makes you some kind of hero? No. Then what exactly are you trying to do? Troy answered, without hesitation. Protect the foundation. Derek laughed harshly. Come on. This is personal and you know it. The ballroom felt smaller suddenly. Quieter. Derek stepped closer. You've been jealous since day one. Troy remained still. No. Vanessa chose me because she was tired of being invisible next to you. That sentence finally drew a reaction. Not from Troy. From Vanessa. Derek. But Derek continued anyway. Because arrogant men usually mistake restraint for weakness right before disaster, you sit in corners acting morally superior while people like me actually build things? Troy studied him calmly. You built a valuation deck. Derek froze slightly. Excuse me. You sold projections as infrastructure. Rachel slowly closed her tablet. Marcus watched silently now. Troy continued. You claimed freight optimization data that doesn't exist, used charity access to chase investors, and convince Vanessa operational money could quietly float your company until the next funding round. Derek's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Troy to know every assumption was correct. You have no proof. Rachel finally spoke. We do. The sentence landed flat and cold. Marcus opened the document box. Inside sat printed communications financial routing records, vendor shell agreements, and time-stamped transfer approvals. Too organized, too complete. Derek understood immediately. The investigation had been running longer than he realized. He looked back toward the ballroom exits instinctively, not fleeing, calculating. Troy recognized the expression. Logistics executives used it when supply chains collapsed unexpectedly. Search for exits first, solutions second. Vanessa whispered. Oh my God. Derek snapped toward her. Stop saying that. Then his phone buzzed. He checked the screen, and for the first time all night, real fear crossed his face openly. What? Vanessa asked. Derek didn't answer immediately. Troy noticed the caller ID reflected briefly against the dark screen. Vector Lane, legal. Rachel noticed too. Interesting, her expression said silently. Derek walked several feet away to answer. Vanessa looked physically unsteady now. What's happening? Marcus answered bluntly. My guess investors are finding out. Outside the ballroom windows, Chicago rain hammered dark streets, while emergency lights flashed somewhere along Michigan Avenue. The city kept moving, always moving. Vanessa sat down slowly. Troy. He looked at her. Did you ever actually love me? The question arrived too late, not because the answer was no, because the answer used to be yes, and that was worse. Troy spoke carefully. I loved who you were before all this. Tears finally reached her eyes then, real ones, not social tears, not controlled emotion for donor rooms and cameras, just collapse. You think I wanted this life, she whispered. Troy looked at the diamond necklace around her throat. Scholarship money glittered under ballroom lights. I think you wanted people to envy you. Vanessa looked down immediately, because it was true. Before either could speak again, Eleanor Whitmore crossed the ballroom carrying her phone tightly in one hand. Her face had gone completely pale. Everyone noticed. What happened? Rachel asked. Eleanor looked directly at Troy. The FBI Financial Crimes Division contacted the foundation. Silence. Absolute silence. Even Derek stopped speaking on his call across the room. Eleanor continued carefully. They want immediate access to financial records connected to tonight's disclosures. Vanessa closed her eyes. Derek slowly lowered his phone from his ear. And Troy Bryant finally understood the situation had moved beyond social scandal forever. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Vector Lane AI's valuation had started collapsing in real time. Troy Bryant watched it happen from the 22nd floor of Bryant Harbor Capitol, while gray Chicago snow drifted sideways beyond the office windows. No celebration crossed his face, only observation. 3 monitors displayed financial feeds and internal reports, while muted CNBC coverage rolled silently across the wall television. Vector Lane AI faces investor questions after charity gala controversy. The headline sat beneath Derek Holloway's smiling press photo taken less than 2 weeks earlier. Different world now. Rachel Mercer entered Troy's office carrying coffee and a stack of legal folders. "You should probably eat something." Troy glanced at the untouched breakfast sandwich she placed beside him. "I'm fine. You've said that for 16 straight hours." Troy leaned back slightly. "How bad is it?" Rachel opened the top folder. 3 investment firms suspended negotiations overnight. That fast, they saw the transfer records. Outside the office, glass analysts moved quickly between conference rooms, while assistants whispered into phones. The entire building felt sharper today, like pressure moving through steel beams. Rachel continued reading. Vector Lane also has exposure problems. Troy looked up. What kind? Projected infrastructure claims? That didn't surprise him. Derek's presentations always sounded too polished, too inflated, too dependent on future outcomes instead of existing systems. Rachel slid another report across the desk. Internal source from Austin leaked preliminary investor materials. Troy scanned the pages quietly. Artificial freight prediction metrics, shipping efficiency projections, rail optimization partnerships. Several listed partnerships did not actually exist. Others exaggerated minor pilot programs into national infrastructure claims. Classic startup inflation, but dangerous at Derek's valuation level. Rachel folded her arms. "You knew, didn't you?" "Yes." How Troy looked toward the snowy skyline. "Because logistics people don't talk the way Derek talks." Rachel waited. Troy continued calmly. "Real infrastructure operators speak in margins. Delays, insurance exposure, maintenance windows, labor costs." He tapped the report lightly. Derek spoke like a motivational speaker trying to impress investors who never worked inside freight systems. Rachel almost smiled, and nobody else caught it. They wanted to believe him. That was the problem with charisma. It often replaced competence long enough to become expensive. Across the television screen market, analysts discussed emerging concerns surrounding governance transparency, corporate language for disaster. Troy's phone buzzed softly. Eleanor Whitmore. He answered immediately. How bad Eleanor didn't waste time. 2 national outlets are preparing stories. Names Bloomberg and the Tribune. Troy nodded once, expected. What about the board? Terrified. That answer almost sounded exhausted. Troy could picture the emergency meetings already happening. Wealthy donors protecting reputations, attorneys restructuring narratives, board members pretending they noticed problems earlier than they actually had. Has Derek responded publicly? Not yet. He will. And when he did, he would try to separate himself from Vanessa immediately. Troy understood men like Derek perfectly now. Success belonged to them personally. Failure belonged to everyone else. At 11:14 a.m., Derek finally appeared on financial news feeds. Not live. Pre-recorded statement. Professional lighting, dark navy suit, controlled voice. Troy watched from his desk while Rachel stood silently beside him. Vector Lane AI remains fully committed to transparency and innovation, Derek announced. Recent allegations connected to unrelated nonprofit accounting matters are being intentionally distorted by individuals with personal motivations. Rachel looked toward Troy immediately. He's coming after you. Troy remained still. Derek continued. Any implication that Vector Lane knowingly engaged in improper financial activity is categorically false. Then came the mistake. We trusted the wrong people operationally, Rachel muttered softly. There it is. Troy already understood what Derek meant. Vanessa. The distancing had begun. 1 hour later, Vanessa arrived at Bryant Harbor Capital unexpectedly. The receptionist called upstairs first. She says it's urgent. Troy looked through the office glass toward the city. Send her up. Rachel closed several folders quickly. You sure? Yes. Vanessa entered 5 minutes later, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the weather. Her appearance shocked even Rachel slightly. No makeup, hair hurriedly tied back, no social polish left. She looked like someone who had not slept, because she probably hadn't. The moment she entered Troy's office, she removed the sunglasses. Her eyes were swollen red. Troy. Rachel gathered documents quietly. I'll give you the room. No, Troy said calmly. Stay. Vanessa noticed that immediately. Another boundary. Another change. She looked around the office slowly then. The skyline views, the staff moving beyond glass walls, the subtle luxury hidden inside quiet design choices. Recognition spread across her face piece by piece. This place, she whispered. Yes. You own this. Yes. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. How long? 10 years. The answer visibly destabilized her because it forced her to confront something unbearable. She had never actually known her husband. Not financially, not emotionally, not professionally, not at all. Troy. She shook her head slowly. Why would you hide this from me? Troy answered honestly. I didn't hide it. You never told me, you never asked. The silence afterward hurt her more than shouting would have. Vanessa walked slowly toward the windows. I thought you were... She stopped herself. Ordinary Troy finished. She closed her eyes briefly. I thought you lacked ambition. Troy almost smiled at that, because ambition built half the rail logistics infrastructure, supporting Midwest freight corridors, now generating enormous returns under Bryant Harbor Capital. But none of it looked flashy enough for Vanessa. You were embarrassed by me, he said quietly. Vanessa turned sharply. No, then softer. Sometimes. The honesty surprised even her. Troy simply nodded once. Thank you. Vanessa stared at him helplessly. You're acting like this marriage is already over. Troy opened a desk drawer calmly, removed a thick legal envelope, set it carefully on the table between them. Vanessa looked down at it, didn't touch it, already knew. No, Rachel prepared everything 7 months ago. Vanessa's face emptied completely. 7 months. That's when I realized you were planning a future without me. Her breathing became uneven again. Troy listened to me. No, he interrupted gently. You need to listen now. The room became perfectly still. You didn't leave because I was poor. Vanessa looked at him silently. You left because I wasn't visible enough for the life you wanted. Tears rolled down her face instantly after that. Not dramatic, just defeated. You think Derek cares about me? She whispered. Troy said nothing, because they both already knew the answer. Vanessa sat slowly in the chair across from him. He said we were building something together. No, Troy answered quietly. He was building leverage. The sentence landed with devastating clarity, because now she could finally see it too. Every donor dinner, every gala appearance, every carefully staged photograph. She had not been a partner. She had been access. Vanessa covered her face briefly with both hands. Behind her, Chicago snow continued falling beyond the windows, while muted television analysts discussed Vector Lane's rapidly dropping valuation. At 2:37 p.m., another alert crossed financial feeds. Vector Lane Investor Group pauses funding round, then another. Former employees question. Internal performance claims. Rachel's phone buzzed repeatedly beside her legal folders. It's accelerating, she said quietly. Troy nodded once. Derek built his empire on confidence, and confidence collapsed faster than infrastructure ever did. Vanessa looked toward the television in horror. "He's blaming me," Rachel answered carefully. "He's protecting himself." "That bastard." Troy watched her silently. Interesting, he thought. Only now did she recognize selfishness when it turned toward her. Vanessa stood suddenly. "You can fix this." Troy looked up slowly. "No." "You can stop the investigation." "No." "Troy, please." This stopped being private the moment Foundation money moved into business accounts. Vanessa stepped closer desperately. "You still love me." That one hurt. Not because it was manipulation, because once upon a time it was true. Troy looked at her for several long seconds, then answered with painful honesty, "I love the version of you that existed before all this." Vanessa broke completely after that. Not loudly, no screaming. She simply sat back down and cried quietly, while the empire she helped build around Derek Holloway collapsed across national financial news. And Troy Bryant finally understood there was nothing left to save anymore. The divorce papers were delivered quietly on a Thursday morning. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting across marble floors. A private courier arrived at the Lincoln Park house at 9:12 a.m., while Vanessa sat alone in the kitchen staring at financial news updates she barely understood anymore. The envelope carried Rachel Mercer's firm logo in the corner. Vanessa already knew what it contained before opening it. Still, her hands trembled slightly unfolding the documents. Petition for dissolution of marriage, asset protection notices, temporary financial restrictions, separate residency agreements. She stopped reading halfway through page 3. The numbers no longer made sense, or rather they finally did. Most of the wealth she thought belonged to their marriage never legally touched her name at all. Bryant Harbor Capital sat protected through layered ownership structures and premarital investment entities built years before their relationship deteriorated. The foundation remained separate. The rail holdings remained separate. The warehouse portfolios remained separate. Even portions of the Lincoln Park property had been refinanced and secured through trust structures she never bothered learning about, because she assumed Troy lacked sophistication. That assumption was now costing her everything. Vanessa lowered the paper slowly onto the kitchen counter. Outside, melting snow dripped from rooftops beneath gray Chicago skies, while delivery trucks crawled through morning traffic. The house felt enormous suddenly. Too quiet, too expensive, too empty. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered immediately. "Hello, Troy Bryant." "No, this is Vanessa." A pause. "Then this is Federal Financial Review Services regarding authorization records tied to the Bryant Futures Foundation." Vanessa closed her eyes instantly. The calls had started. By afternoon, 2 board positions suspended her pending investigation review. One donor organization publicly removed her from an upcoming charity panel in Evanston. Another social committee quietly stopped returning messages altogether. Chicago's elite social world operated on invitation. And invitations disappeared fast when legal exposure entered the room. Meanwhile, Troy Bryant's life barely seemed to change. That unsettled Vanessa more than anything else. The next morning, Troy stopped at the same small coffee shop near Fulton Market he'd visited for almost 6 years. Same order, black coffee, turkey sandwich around noon. Same old winter coat Vanessa once mocked repeatedly. The owner, Luis, handed him coffee with unusual hesitation. "You okay, man?" Troy looked mildly surprised. "Yes." Luis rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "My wife saw that Gala thing online." Of course she did. Clips from the wine incident had spread across social media overnight. Grainy smartphone videos captured Vanessa throwing Cabernet across Troy's tuxedo, while stunned guests gasped nearby. Several headlines focused more on the humiliation than the financial scandal. Silent millionaire, humiliated, at his own charity gala. The irony made excellent internet content. Louis shook his head slowly. Crazy world. Troy accepted the coffee calmly. Something like that. As he turned to leave, two younger customers near the window suddenly recognized him. One whispered, "That's him." Troy kept walking. Attention already felt exhausting. At Bryant Harbor, Capitol staff members treated him differently now too. More carefully, more respectfully. News coverage changed perception fast. Executives who once saw Troy as a quiet infrastructure investor now realized the scale of what he actually controlled. Rachel Mercer entered his office shortly after lunch carrying updated financial summaries. "Temporary account protections are active," she said. Troy nodded once. "Joint cards, frozen this morning. House. She can remain there temporarily." Troy looked toward the skyline. "That's fine." Rachel studied him carefully. "You really aren't interested in punishing her? No? You know most people would be." Troy considered that for a moment, then answered honestly. "She already destroyed the only thing that mattered." Rachel said nothing after that, because she understood. Trust did not collapse loudly. It collapsed permanently. Later that afternoon, Troy drove toward a warehouse development site near Cicero Avenue. The silver Avalon still carried faint scratches near the rear bumper, and a crack in the dashboard leather Vanessa constantly complained about. Troy never fixed cosmetic things unless necessary. Function mattered more. At a stoplight near downtown, another driver rolled down his window suddenly. "Hey," Troy glanced sideways. The man recognized him immediately. "You're that Gala guy." Troy gave a small nod. The man grinned. "She shouldn't have done that to you." Then the light changed. Traffic moved. Conversation over. Troy drove on. Across Chicago, public opinion was forming faster than legal outcomes. And public opinion strongly preferred quiet victims over arrogant social climbers. Vanessa felt that shift everywhere now. By Friday evening, she sat alone inside the Lincoln Park house, scrolling through articles and comments until the words blurred together. Some people defended her. Most did not. A former donor publicly called her recklessly unethical. An online finance blog described Derek Holloway as another startup narcissist using philanthropy as investor bait. Worse than criticism, though, was the silence. Friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. People she once spent years impressing suddenly acted like they barely remembered her. At 8:47 p.m., Claire Bennett arrived unexpectedly. Vanessa opened the door, looking exhausted. Claire stepped inside slowly. "You look terrible." "Thanks." Claire removed her coat carefully. For several awkward seconds, neither spoke. Then Claire asked quietly, "Did you really use scholarship money for Derek's company?" Vanessa sat heavily on the couch. It wasn't supposed to become this. Claire stared at her in disbelief. "Troy paid my student loans." Vanessa looked up sharply. "What?" Claire folded her arms. $92,000. 2 years ago. Vanessa blinked repeatedly. "No, he didn't." "Yes, he did. That was a refinance program." Claire shook her head slowly. "No, he paid it himself." The room went completely silent. Another invisible thing Troy handled quietly. Another truth Vanessa never bothered seeing. Claire looked around the massive house. "You never understood him." Vanessa's voice cracked slightly. "You think I don't know that now?" Claire softened a little after hearing that. "But only a little. You treated him like he was small." Vanessa stared at the floor. Because she had. Not openly at first, not intentionally every day, but gradually, consistently, death by disrespect. Claire sat beside her carefully. "You know what's crazy?" Vanessa looked up. "He never once talked badly about you." That one hurt. Deeply. because it sounded exactly like Troy, calm even while bleeding. Across town that same night, Troy sat alone in his smaller apartment overlooking the Chicago River, reviewing foundation restructuring proposals with Eleanor Whitmore. The apartment looked nothing like the Lincoln Park mansion. Simple furniture, minimal decoration, quiet, peaceful. Eleanor closed one financial report and sighed heavily. "We'll survive this." "Yes, but barely." Troy nodded. Scholarship funds remain protected thanks to emergency reserve accounts he established years earlier without informing most board members. Preparation again, always preparation. Eleanor looked at him carefully over reading glasses. "You know the city's turning you into some kind of folk hero." Troy almost smiled. "That sounds exhausting." "It probably is." Snow drifted softly beyond the apartment windows while tugboats moved slowly through dark water below. For the first time in months, the silence around Troy felt clean instead of heavy. Not happiness, not yet, but clarity. His phone buzzed unexpectedly on the table. "Vanessa?" Eleanor glanced toward it. "You going to answer?" Troy watched the screen for several seconds, then declined the call quietly. 1 minute later, another notification appeared. Chicago Tribune requesting interview regarding anonymous scholarship donations. Troy ignored that too, because attention still felt dangerous, and because deep down Troy Bryant still hated being seen. The Chicago Tribune article went live at 5:43 a.m. on a freezing Monday morning. By 6 o'clock, half the city's financial community had already read it. Troy Bryant first saw the headline while standing inside his apartment kitchen, pouring coffee into the same dented steel thermos he had carried for years. The quiet donor behind Illinois' largest scholarship network. Below the title sat a photograph taken without his knowledge 3 days earlier. Troy exiting a warehouse development meeting in Cicero. Dark winter coat, old leather briefcase, silver Toyota Avalon behind him dusted with snow. No glamour, no staged lighting, just reality. He read the article slowly while Chicago morning traffic hummed faintly 20 floors below. The reporter Diane Keller had done real work. She traced scholarship growth numbers across 7 years, interviewed former students, verified anonymous donation structures through foundation disclosures and state nonprofit filings. No sensationalism, no gossip, just facts. Troy respected that. The article detailed how Bryant Futures funded over 3,400 scholarship recipients, multiple trade certification programs, nursing grants, Southside apprenticeship initiatives, logistics training partnerships across Illinois. One section hit harder than expected. He never attached his name to any building scholarship or media campaign, Eleanor Whitmore told the Tribune. Most people in our own donor circles had no idea he was the primary benefactor. Troy stared at the sentence for several seconds, not because of pride, because anonymity had mattered deeply to him. Now it was gone. His phone started ringing before he finished the article. First Bloomberg, then CNBC, then 2 podcast producers, then national business outlets requesting interviews about quiet wealth, ethical leadership, and anonymous philanthropy. Troy ignored every call. By 9:30, Bryant Harbor Capital's reception floor looked like security headquarters. Reporters gathered outside the building entrance beneath snowfall, while assistants rerouted media inquiries nonstop. Rachel Mercer entered Troy's office carrying another stack of requests. "You officially became interesting." Troy looked tired already. "That sounds unfortunate." Rachel almost smiled. "Most people would love this. Most people don't understand attention." He meant it. Wealth never frightened Troy. Exposure did. Rachel sat across from him. "You can shape the narrative now. I don't want a narrative. You already have one." That was true. The internet had built its own version of Troy Bryant over the weekend. The quiet millionaire, the invisible husband, the man publicly humiliated at his own gala. Social media loved simple morality stories. and Troy unintentionally fit perfectly inside one. Meanwhile, Vanessa Bryant's world kept collapsing quietly in the background. That same morning, she sat alone at a small cafe near Gold Coast wearing sunglasses indoors while pretending not to read the Tribune article on her phone. People recognized her anyway, not openly, but enough. Whispers followed her now, quick glances, judgment hidden behind lowered voices. A group of younger women near the counter kept looking toward her while scrolling their phones. Vanessa left without finishing coffee. Back downtown, Troy attended an emergency foundation meeting at noon. The atmosphere inside the boardroom had changed completely. 2 weeks earlier, several members barely acknowledged him during the discussions. Now everyone stood when he entered. Too respectful, too careful. Troy disliked it immediately. Eleanor Whitmore opened the meeting formally. First scholarship operations remained secure. Relief spread visibly across several board members. Troy had quietly transferred enough reserve funding to stabilize the foundation through the scandal months earlier. Again, preparation. Marcus Reed continued the update. Federal investigators requested expanded documentation tied to operational transfers, connected with Vector Lane AI. One board member adjusted his glasses nervously. "Are criminal charges likely?" Rachel answered carefully. Too early to say, but everyone understood what too early really meant. Possible. Very possible. After the meeting ended, Eleanor stopped Troy near the elevator. "You should have gone into politics." Troy looked mildly horrified. "That's probably the worst thing anyone said to me all month." Eleanor laughed quietly for the first time in days. Then her expression softened. "You saved this organization." "No," Troy answered calmly. "The students did. We just failed them temporarily." Eleanor watched him disappear into the elevator afterward, and for the first time she fully understood why people trusted him with enormous systems. Because Troy Bryant never centered himself in the story. That afternoon, Troy finally agreed to one interview request. Not television, not finance media. A local education nonprofit podcast hosted by former scholarship recipients. Rachel looked genuinely confused. "You turned down CNN?" "Yes, but accepted a podcast with 12,000 listeners. They're the only ones asking the right questions." The interview happened remotely from Troy's office. No cameras, no makeup, no dramatic music. The host, a former scholarship student named Daniel Ruiz, sounded nervous introducing him. "Mr. Bryant, a lot of people want to know why you stayed anonymous for so long." Troy thought about the answer carefully. "Because the scholarships weren't about me." Silence on the line. Then Daniel asked quietly, "Did it hurt? What happened at the gala?" Troy looked out across the Chicago skyline before answering. "Yes." Not dramatic, not defensive, just honest. Daniel swallowed audibly. "A lot of people online think you got revenge." Troy shook his head slightly, even though nobody could see it. "Documentation isn't revenge." That quote spread online within hours. By evening, clips from the interview circulated across business pages and social media accounts. Documentation isn't revenge. People repeated it like philosophy. Troy hated that part most, because he never intended to become symbolic. At 7:18 p.m., another package arrived at Bryant Harbor Capitol reception. No return address. Security scanned it first before bringing it upstairs. Inside sat dozens of handwritten letters bundled carefully together. From scholarship recipients. Troy opened the first one, slowly. "Dear Mr. Bryant, my mom cried when she found out who you were." He read another. "I'm the first engineer in my family because of your scholarship." Another. "You paid for my nursing program after my dad died." Another. "I saw what happened to you online. You didn't deserve that." Troy sat quietly at his desk, reading letter after letter while darkness settled over downtown Chicago outside the windows. Some letters contained spelling mistakes. Others carried folded photographs. One included a graduation tassel taped inside construction paper. The last envelope looked different from the others, smaller, older handwriting. Troy opened it carefully. Inside sat a short handwritten note from a 14-year-old boy in Inglewood named Malik Turner. Mr. Bryant, my brother said rich people only help when cameras are watching. I showed him your story. Now he thinks maybe some people are different. Thank you for helping my mom pay for my school program. I want to work in transportation engineering someday. Troy read the letter twice, then slowly leaned back in his chair. The office remained silent except for distant traffic below. For the first time since the gala, something inside him loosened slightly. Not relief, something quieter. Perspective. Because while Vanessa and Derek chased visibility status and admiration, the real impact of his life had happened far away from cameras all along. And maybe that mattered more than the humiliation ever could. His phone buzzed softly against the desk. Unknown number again. Troy almost ignored it, then answered. Hello? Pause. Then Vanessa's voice, small, unsteady. I saw the article. Troy said nothing. Another pause. I never knew any of that about you. Outside the office window, snow continued falling across Chicago, while the city slowly turned white beneath the night. The call from Vanessa lasted exactly 37 seconds. Troy Bryant didn't move during most of it. He simply stood by the office window, watching snow fall across downtown Chicago, while her voice tried to find a place to land in a conversation that no longer had soft edges. I never knew any of that about you. Silence followed immediately. Not dramatic silence. Final silence. Troy finally answered carefully. You didn't ask. Another pause. Vanessa's breathing came through the line unevenly. I didn't understand what I was looking at, she said. Troy watched a snowplow move slowly across Lower Wacker Drive. That's the problem, he replied quietly. You were always looking. The line went quiet again, long enough for both of them to realize there was nothing left to interpret. Then Vanessa spoke one last time. Is there any way to fix this? Troy didn't answer immediately, because he was thinking about the gala ballroom, the wine glass, the cameras, the moment she had chosen image over judgment, not once, but repeatedly. No, he said finally. A breath broke on the other end. Then the call ended. Troy lowered the phone slowly and set it on the desk without looking at it again. Behind him, Rachel Mercer stood quietly in the doorway. You didn't sound angry, she said. I'm not. Rachel stepped inside. That's worse, isn't it? Troy didn't respond. Because she was right. Anger implied attachment, and attachment was already gone. The federal investigation escalated 2 days later. Not publicly at first. Quiet subpoenas, structured requests, document holds across foundation-linked accounts and third-party vendor systems. Marcus Reed coordinated with federal financial investigators from a secure conference room on the 32nd floor. Troy stayed out of those meetings. He preferred distance now, not emotional distance, operational distance. He had learned long ago that proximity to chaos rarely improved clarity. By midweek, Derek Holloway reappeared in public, this time in a different tone. No polished optimism, no confident investor language, just damage control. A short press statement filmed inside a generic office space with neutral lighting and no branding behind him. I have fully cooperated with all inquiries regarding Vector Lane AI, Derek said. His smile looked forced. The company is committed to transparency and is currently reviewing internal financial procedures. The word reviewing mattered. It meant uncertainty. It meant exposure. It meant time was running out. Across the internet, analysts dissected his wording instantly. Former supporters distanced themselves publicly. Investors froze positions. And quietly, one by one, contracts began dissolving. Troy watched none of it live. He only saw summaries. He had stopped tracking Derek emotionally, only structurally. At Bryant Harbor Capital, the focus remained entirely on stabilization. Scholarship funding schedules were reviewed line by line, emergency reserves were locked, no interruptions allowed. Students would not suffer because adults failed systems. That remained Troy's only consistent boundary. One evening, Eleanor Whitmore arrived unexpectedly at Troy's office. She looked older than she had a week earlier, not physically, emotionally. "You should see this," she said, placing a folder on his desk. Troy opened it. Inside were updated foundation board statements, formal separation from Vanessa Bryant, full cooperation with federal investigators, and a final line that made everything official. Vanessa Bryant has been removed from all fiduciary access, effective immediately. Troy nodded once. Expected. Eleanor studied him carefully. "You're not curious what happens to her now?" Troy closed the folder. "No." That answer surprised even her. "You don't care." Troy thought about it for a moment. "I care about consequences," he said, "not outcomes." Eleanor exhaled slowly. "That's a very specific kind of distance. It's necessary." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eleanor leaned against the desk slightly. "There's something else." Troy looked up. "Derek Holloway is negotiating a partial liquidation of Vector Lane assets." That caught Troy's attention slightly. "Already, yes. Who's buying multiple firms at discounted valuation?" Troy nodded. "That's fast." Eleanor studied him. "You expected it. I built logistics models for companies like his before," Troy said calmly. "They always fail the same way. How overconfidence in projections, underestimation of real infrastructure cost." Eleanor frowned slightly. "So you knew he would collapse," Troy corrected her gently. "I knew he would overextend." Eleanor paused, and Vanessa Troy looked toward the window. Snow still falling, Chicago still moving. "She chose proximity to that overstability," he said quietly. "That was her decision." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Still sounds harsh when you say it like that." Troy didn't disagree, but he didn't soften it either, because truth didn't require comfort. Later that night, Vanessa sat alone inside a rented apartment on the near north side. Smaller, quieter, stripped of everything that once defined her identity. No gala invitations on the table, no designer clothing visible. Just a laptop open on a kitchen counter and a half-empty glass of water beside it. She had spent the entire day reading everything: articles, comments, legal summaries, old emails she had once ignored. The pattern was impossible to unsee now. Troy had never been invisible. He had been deliberately unobserved, and she had confused the two. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered hesitantly. "Hello?" A woman's voice, calm, professional. "Ms. Bryant, this is Federal Financial Compliance Office. We're requesting your availability for a preliminary interview regarding foundation fund distribution." Vanessa closed her eyes. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'll cooperate." After the call ended, she sat still for a long time, then opened another email. This one from Claire. Short, direct. "You were wrong about him." Vanessa didn't reply, because she didn't know how. Across the city, Troy stood inside Bryant Harbor Capital's observation lounge, reviewing final scholarship allocations for the quarter. Rachel entered with a final update. Media interest is peaking again. Troy didn't look up. "In what direction?" "Mixed," she said. "Some still focus on the Gala incident. Others are shifting toward your scholarship work." Troy nodded slightly. "That will stabilize." Rachel hesitated. "Most people are calling you a symbol now." Troy finally looked at her. "I'm not a symbol." Rachel smiled faintly. "I know that." Silence settled again. Then Rachel added Vanessa accepted federal cooperation terms. Troy nodded once. "That's good for the students." Rachel studied him. "And for you?" Troy paused. then answered honestly, "It removes uncertainty." That was all. No satisfaction, no revenge narrative, just resolution. Later that evening, Troy drove alone along Lakeshore Drive. The city lights reflected across black water while snow blurred street lamps into soft halos. He passed the Blackstone Hotel. The ballroom, where everything had changed, still glowed faintly inside. Workers were already dismantling event structures. The gala no longer existed. Only consequences remained. Troy didn't slow down. He continued driving north until the city behind him softened into distance. His phone buzzed once more, a message from an unknown number. This time he opened it. A photo. A group of scholarship students standing outside a university engineering building holding acceptance letters. Below it, a caption, "We made it because of you." Troy stared at the image for several seconds, then placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. Outside, snow continued falling across Chicago. Inside the car, everything remained quiet. And for the first time since the gala, Troy Bryant wasn't thinking about what had been taken from him, only what had quietly been built all along. The first thing Troy Bryant noticed after the noise faded was how ordinary everything became again. No reporters outside his building, no breaking news alerts every hour, no emergency calls from foundation staff, just Chicago returning to its usual rhythm. Cold wind, slow traffic, muted conversations in elevators, life continuing without waiting for anyone to catch up. Bryant Harbor Capital had stabilized completely by the third week after the Gala incident. Vector Lane AI no longer dominated financial headlines. Its valuation had dropped nearly 70%, and acquisition talks were now focused on restructuring rather than growth. Derek Holloway had disappeared from public statements entirely. Vanessa Bryant was no longer mentioned in any official capacity tied to the foundation. And Troy, despite being at the center of everything, returned to something resembling routine. He arrived at work early, left late, reviewed logistics portfolios, approved scholarship distributions, rejected every interview request that still came through. Rachel Mercer entered his office one afternoon carrying a slim folder. "Final settlement documents are ready," she said. Troy glanced up briefly. "Any complications?" Number Vanessa signed everything. That should have meant closure, but Rachel didn't leave immediately. She placed the folder on his desk and remained standing. "There's something else," she said. Troy already sensed it from her tone. "What happened?" Rachel hesitated. Derek Holloway agreed to a formal cooperation deal with investigators. Troy nodded once. "Expected," and Rachel exhaled slowly. "He's providing documentation on financial transfers involving Vanessa's authorization." The room went quiet. Not because Troy was surprised, because confirmation always carried more weight than suspicion. Rachel continued carefully. "It includes messages, approvals, and timeline coordination." Troy leaned back slightly in his chair. "So it's done?" "Yes," she said. "Legally speaking, it's done." That phrase mattered. Legally speaking. Because emotionally, nothing ever really ended cleanly. Rachel studied him. "You're not asking what happens to them." Troy looked toward the city skyline. Snow was thinner today, almost melting into gray slush across glass and steel. "No." Rachel frowned slightly. "That's it," Troy answered simply. "It stopped being my concern when it stopped being my responsibility." Rachel didn't respond immediately. She had worked with enough clients to understand how rare that mindset was. Most people wanted resolution and revenge intertwined. Troy wanted neither, only completion. Later that day, Troy left the office earlier than usual. He drove through West Loop toward Southside Chicago without telling anyone where he was going. The Avalon moved steadily through streets that became less polished the farther south he traveled. Buildings changed. Storefronts became older. Life became louder. Eventually, he parked near a community center in Inglewood, the same neighborhood where scholarship recruitment had quietly begun years earlier. Inside the building smelled like old wood paint and warm heating systems struggling against winter. A group of teenagers sat in a classroom reviewing engineering basics on laptops. One of them looked up first, then another, then suddenly several. Recognition didn't happen instantly. It built slowly. Then someone whispered, "That's him." Troy stood near the doorway, hands in his coat pockets. He didn't move forward. He didn't interrupt the class. He simply waited. A young man stood up slowly from the front row. "Are you Troy Bryant?" Troy nodded once. "Yes." The room went quiet in a different way than the gala had gone quiet. This silence wasn't shock, it was curiosity. The student hesitated. "I got accepted into the logistics program," he said carefully. "Through your scholarship." Troy nodded again. "Good." Another student spoke up. "My sister got nursing support." Another. "My cousin's trade program started last year." The room slowly filled with overlapping stories. Not loud, not emotional, just real. Troy listened. That was all he came to do. After a few minutes, the first student asked quietly, "Why didn't you ever tell people it was you?" Troy considered the question carefully, then answered honestly, "Because it was never supposed to be about me." The student frowned slightly. "But people think it matters?" Troy shook his head. "People think a lot of things matter because they are visible." That sentence lingered. One of the younger students at the back raised a hand. "Do you regret it?" Troy looked at him. No. No hesitation, no complexity, just truth. The teacher in the back of the room watched quietly, almost unsure whether to interrupt or let it continue. Troy stepped slightly inside the classroom now, not fully, just enough to be present. "I grew up not far from here," he said. That got their attention differently. Not as a billionaire, not as a donor, but as proximity. "I know what it feels like to think certain doors are not meant for you." He paused briefly. "And I know what it feels like when someone opens one anyway." Silence returned, but this time it was warmer, more grounded. One student asked, "Did you ever want to stop?" Troy thought about that honestly. "Yes." A few students looked surprised. "Usually when people assumed I didn't exist," he said calmly. That caused a few quiet reactions. Not laughter, not pity, understanding. He looked around the room slowly. "But you don't stop because of how people see you," he added. "You stop when what you're building stops mattering." The teacher finally stepped forward slightly. "We appreciate you coming here," she said carefully. Troy nodded. "I'm not here as a guest." "What are you here as?" A pause. "Someone who remembers." That answer ended the conversation naturally. No applause, no speeches, just a shared understanding settling into the room. When Troy left the community center, the sky outside had already started dimming into early evening. Snow was lighter now, almost non-existent. He stood outside for a moment before getting into the car. Inside the Avalon, the heater took a few seconds to warm the cabin. He didn't start driving immediately. Instead, he looked out at the neighborhood streets, kids walking home, small stores lighting up for evening business, life continuing without interruption. His phone buzzed once, a message from Rachel. Settlement finalized. No further legal exposure anticipated. Troy read it once, then set the phone down. For the first time in months, nothing required immediate action. No crisis, no collapse, no investigation, only time. As he drove back toward downtown Chicago, the skyline gradually returned. Bright lights, glass towers, reflections of a city that never fully stopped moving. The Blackstone Hotel appeared again in the distance, still standing, still hosting events, still carrying echoes of everything that happened inside it. Troy didn't look at it for long. He simply passed by. The road ahead was clear, And for the first time since everything began, there was nothing chasing him from behind. Only forward movement, quiet, stable, unremarkable, exactly how he preferred it. The Blackstone Hotel ballroom looked different a year later, not because it changed, but because Troy Bryant no longer saw it the same way. The chandeliers were still the same. The marble floors still reflected light too perfectly. The stage still carried the same backdrop panels for corporate galas and charity events. But tonight there was no tension in the air, no hidden deals, no performance of status, just a quiet foundation event organized without media attention. Bryant Future's scholarship initiative had returned to its original purpose, smaller, cleaner, rebuilt under stricter oversight and with fewer people who cared about being seen. Troy arrived at 6:58 p.m. Same entrance, same slow walk through revolving doors, same old silver Avalon waiting outside in valet parking. But this time, nobody misidentified him. No one assumed he was staff. No one ignored him. He simply wasn't the center of attention anymore. And that was intentional. Eleanor Whitmore greeted him near the entrance. "You came," she said. Troy nodded. "You said there was a student speaking?" "Yes." They walked together into the ballroom. The audience was smaller than the previous gala. No politicians, no celebrity donors, just recipients, families, board members, and a few quiet sponsors. Rachel Mercer sat near the side aisle reviewing documents, but looked up briefly when Troy entered. She gave a small nod. Everything was stable now, controlled, corrected. On stage, a young man stepped up to the microphone. Troy recognized him immediately. The same student from Inglewood, now older, more confident. Wearing a suit that didn't quite fit perfectly yet. But it didn't matter. He spoke into the microphone carefully. "My name is Malik Turner," he began. A few smiles in the audience. "I grew up in Inglewood on the south side of Chicago." He paused. Troy remained still. Malik continued. "I used to think people like me didn't end up in rooms like this unless they got lucky." A quiet reaction in the audience. But I learned something. He looked down briefly at his notes. "Sometimes it's not luck. Sometimes it's someone deciding that you matter before you ever know who they are." Troy exhaled slowly, not emotionally, just present. Malik continued. "I never met the man who funded my scholarship until last year." He looked toward the audience. "And when I did, I expected someone loud. A small nervous laugh from the crowd. But he wasn't loud. His gaze shifted slightly. He was just there." The room went quiet again. "I want to say thank you to Troy Bryant." All eyes in the ballroom slowly turned, not dramatically, not suddenly, but inevitably. Troy didn't move. He didn't wave. He didn't stand immediately. He simply accepted the moment without trying to shape it. Malik continued. "You changed my life without ever asking for recognition." A pause. "I think that says everything about who you are." Silence followed, then applause. Not loud at first, then building. Troy finally stood slowly, not because he wanted attention, but because refusing it would have meant rejecting the people it represented. Students, families, lives redirected. He gave a small nod toward the stage, then sat back down. The applause faded naturally. Eleanor leaned slightly toward him. "That wasn't easy for you," she said quietly. Troy answered, honestly, "No, but you stayed." "Yes." The event continued with smaller presentations, scholarship renewals, program expansions, community partnerships. Everything felt more grounded than before, less performative, more real. At one point, Rachel approached Troy during a break. "Everything is fully stabilized now," she said. Troy nodded, and Vanessa Rachel hesitated. "She's out of public systems entirely." Troy didn't react immediately, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer required emotional processing. and Derek Holloway working under compliance monitoring in Texas. Smaller role, no public visibility. Troy accepted that quietly. That's enough. Rachel studied him. You never wanted revenge at all, did you? Troy looked toward the ballroom where students were laughing near the refreshment tables. No. What did you want? Troy thought about that for a long moment, then answered, continuity. Rachel nodded slowly, understanding more than she said. Later that night, as guests slowly left the ballroom, Troy remained behind for a few minutes. Eleanor had already gone, Rachel too. Only a few staff members were cleaning up remaining decorations. Troy stood alone near the back of the room, the same place he had once been ignored, the same place wine had once spilled across his shirt. He looked at the space without memory distortion. Not bitterness, not pride, just observation. What had happened there was no longer the center of his life, only a chapter. He walked slowly toward the exit. Outside, Chicago air was cold but clean. Snow had stopped entirely. The city lights reflected across wet pavement like softened glass. Troy stopped briefly near the entrance. His Avalon waited at the curb, engine running, warm interior glowing faintly. Before getting in, he looked back once at the Blackstone Hotel. No emotion crossed his face, no final reflection, just recognition that some places hold meaning only until they don't. Then he turned and got into the car. As he drove away from downtown Chicago, traffic lights passed in slow rhythm across the windshield. Red, green, yellow, movement without urgency. Behind him, the city continued functioning exactly as it always had. Ahead of him, nothing needed fixing anymore. No hidden accounts, no quiet investigations, no structural collapse waiting to happen. Just a road, and a man who no longer needed to be misunderstood in order to be effective. Inside the car, Troy's phone stayed silent. No messages, no notifications, no demands, only distance. And for the first time in a long time, that distance felt complete, not lonely, not triumphant, just finished. What happened to Troy Bryant is not just a story about betrayal or revenge. It's a reminder that real value is often invisible to the people who are too focused on appearances. Troy never needed loud recognition to change lives. He built systems quietly, consistently, and with patience long before anyone thought to respect him for it. And when he was finally misunderstood, disrespected, and publicly humiliated, he didn't respond with chaos. He responded with structure, evidence, and restraint. In the end, truth didn't need to be shouted. It only needed time to surface. For many people, the hardest lesson is understanding that being underestimated can be both painful and powerful. Painful because it comes from people you trusted. Powerful because it gives you space to build without interference. Troy never tried to prove his worth in loud ways. He simply lived in alignment with it. And when everything collapsed around him, what remained wasn't anger, it was impact. Lives he had changed, students he had lifted, futures he had quietly rewritten. If there's something to take from this story, it's this: don't measure your value by who notices you. Measure it by what still stands when emotions fade and noise disappears. If this story made you reflect, share your thoughts in the comments. What part hit you the hardest? And have you ever been underestimated like Troy? I read every comment. And if you enjoy deep emotional storytelling like this, consider subscribing. The next story is even more intense, about a man who lost everything in one night, only to discover who set him up from the very beginning.